All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're totally immersing ourselves in a brilliantly grim, dark, gothic fable. Let's just forget the opera hats with horns for a second, right? We're taking a classic mythological figure, stripping away all that standard romantic tragedy, and reconstructing her through the fierce, unyielding lens of Nietzschean philosophy. Just imagine being a divine weapon, literally a celestial instrument forged entirely to serve the fading laws of an ancient god. What happens when that weapon breaks her chains? What happens when she completely rejects her subjugation to find absolute, terrifying freedom? Let's find out.
We're actually going to skip the standard agenda today, because I really want to plunge you directly into the central conflict of our dark narrative. This is the story of Brynhildre, the Valkyrie. But listen, we aren't looking at her as some weeping maiden waiting around for a hero. No way. We're asking a much more dangerous question. What happens when a divine weapon decides to choose her own target? Well, to understand her rebellion, we first have to understand the absolutely incredible power that made her so valuable to the gods in the first place.
And that power is called Galdrar. Unlike static runes that you might just carve into stone or wood, Galdrar was performative. It was high-pitched, sonic magic. It literally vibrated through the 9 worlds, physically bending the probability of the battlefield to match Odin's intent. Initially, Brynhildr was completely subjugated. She was the vocal instrument of the Allfather's will, the shamanic breath that animated cold iron and wood. Her voice orchestrated the wavering fire of fate itself.
All right, moving into Section 1. The Valkyrie's Divine Song, the audible resonance of authority. Her voice wasn't just some beautiful sound, it was the flawless foundation of the celestial martial order. Okay, let's dive into this, because her sonic sorcery wasn't just a one-trick pony. It spanned 3 highly specific disciplines. When warriors clashed, she used Sig Galdrar, these victory chants, to literally bind the limbs of enemies on the battlefield and sharpen the spirits of favored champions. When kings took to the churning sea, she cast Brimron a Goldroar. These were maritime incantations to repel the water's malevolent spirits, its black hate. And finally, when a warrior was broken, she drew upon the mead of memory for Leek na Galdrar, healing chants designed to essentially sing a shattered spirit right back into its mortal casing.
Now I want you to physically visualize the sheer power of those Sig Galdrar chants. We definitely aren't talking about a catchy, morale-boosting song. The archaic texts describe these chants as possessing a massive physical force. Imagine sound waves warping the reality of the battlefield. Her voice could literally blunt the edge of a deadly blade mid-swing, or turn a simple wooden shield into an absolutely impenetrable wall of sound. It was an incredibly destructive and protective force wielded purely through celestial incantation.
Which brings us to Section 2, the voice of rebellion singing his doom. Think about it. If you have a flawless instrument of authority, the absolute most dangerous thing that can happen is for that instrument to change its pitch.
So let's walk through this timeline and see how this builds into a fluid tragedy. Watch how fast this escalates. It starts with a transgression. She spares a warrior of her own choosing, singing the doom of the god-favored Holmgunnar instead. In retaliation, Odin strikes her with the Sleepthorn, silencing her celestial voice and anchoring her to the mountain. Stripped of that divine frequency, her magic degrades into jagged, mortal speech runes. And finally, the betrayal. She uses those corrupted runes to weave a web of deceit, inciting the murder of Sigurd. You can really see how the cosmic harmony warps into the discordant scream of a broken heart.
There's this quote from the source material that just captures the tragedy perfectly. The voice which once sang the Sigurd Galdrar to empower heroes was reduced to whispering the web of deceit to destroy the Dragon Slayer. The sheer weight of destiny just pressed down on her throat. The celestial swan song that once protected kings was compressed, distorted into what the texts call mortal black hate.
Moving right along to Section 3, Sanctuary of the Flames, Escaping the Herd. Now here is where we pivot. We're shifting this narrative from a tragic, helpless fall to an empowering, philosophical rebirth.
To really grasp this, we need to define a massive philosophical concept, Der freie Geist. This is the Nietzschean free spirit. It describes a being who wanders intellectually and spiritually away from the toxic, unquestioning influence of the herd and away from the fading laws of dying gods. By applying this lens, Brynhild's fiery isolation on the mountain is no longer a punishment. Actually, scratch that. It's not a prison at all. It becomes a deliberate, absolutely necessary step toward total self-mastery. The fire provides the ultimate isolation required to insulate her from the decrees of Valhalla.
So that fire-ringed rock? It was a self-chosen boundary. A sanctuary, really. She didn't passively sit behind that wavering fire of fate, weeping and waiting for a husband to rescue her. No, she lit that fire as an absolute filter. It was a defensive perimeter designed to test which of the mortals could actually endure her intense sovereign gaze without burning to ash. It completely protected her from the herd and those decaying divine laws she had already abandoned.
All right, Section 4, Redemption versus Free Spirit. Two views of the flame. Get ready, because we are preparing for a direct collision between the classic Wagnerian myth and our grim-dark philosophical interpretation.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core difference in how we can understand her ultimate fate. You have the traditional Wagnerian view, which paints this tragically. She throws herself into the fire to redeem the world through love. But you know, Nietzsche found this kind of romantic sacrifice weak, completely life-denying. Instead, the Nietzschean view sees her using the fire for amor fati, this deep, uncompromising love of one's fate. She isn't committing suicide, she's using the flames for self-cleansing, literally burning away her divine conditioning, her grief, and her outdated dependencies on Wotan and Siegfried alike.
So the crucial takeaway here is this. Through this specific lens, her final death song isn't an end, it's a reclamation. She reclaims her divine voice, transforming that funeral pyre into a massive vessel of purification. This ultimate incantation burns away the shame of the earthly deception and reunites her with her true, sovereign, victory-driving frequency.
Now we've reached our climax, Section 5, the Sovereign Wanderer, the hard golden laughter of the heights. I'm going to share a custom aphorism derived directly from our source analysis, styled exactly like Nietzsche's 1882 work, The Gay Science.
Let us look away from those tragic actresses of redemption who throw themselves into the flames out of a lack of options. I want to imagine a different Brunilda, one who has finally learned the hard, golden laughter of the heights. For too long, the poets have made her look down from her mountain, weeping for a hero to cross the flames. What a misunderstanding.
She did not light that fire to find a husband. She lit it to see which of the mortals could endure her gaze. Now, what's really fascinating about this realization is what happens next. When the hero finally arrived, he wasn't a savior. He was altered, corrupted, tangled in the petty lies of the valleys below. Did she weep? Well, perhaps for a moment. But then came a rather sobering realization.
She looked at her burning rock and realized that the fire belonged to her, not to Wotan's fading laws. This right here is her great noon, her Sanctus Genuarius. It is the exact moment of her total liberation. Because to become a free spirit, you must first learn to love the element that consumes the old values.
She does not leap into the ash to die for love. She steps through the smoke to walk away from gods and men alike. So the absolutely crucial point is this. She isn't a victim of the flames, guys. She confidently steps out of the ashes, completely sovereign, entirely independent, leaving all that archaic mythology right behind her.
Just visualize the picture this paints of the sovereign wanderer. She wanders the high ridges alone. Her divine spear is broken, repurposed into a simple walking stick. She has successfully used amor fati to burn away every single past dependency. She is thoroughly, profoundly content to be her own destiny, her own danger, and her own light.
And that, my friends, brings us to the final thought of this explainer. We've watched a divine weapon break her programming, weaponize her own sonic magic, and use the flames of her supposed destruction to forge an unbreakable, sovereign independence. So the question this dark fable leaves us with is deeply personal. Will you wait on the rock for a savior, or will you step through the smoke and become your own danger and your own light? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating source material with me. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative.